what I'm hearing from these various comments is the theme of holding governments accountable, and this is what you were talking about, Radhika, with what exists already on paper. Yes. I mean, there's a part of change, but there's also holding accountable for what's already there. Lamia, you've done a fair amount of work in the environmental movement, and the environmental movement has had some success in organizing around social justice issues. Do you want to comment a little bit about that and the relevancy for this broader conversation?
Sure. Before I go into the environmental movement, I just wanted to speak a little bit to the feminist movement and some of the challenges that the feminists face in terms of linking these global human rights initiatives to the local conditions, right? So where I work, which is in Bangladesh, there have been, the feminist human rights organizations have been working on 3 levels, and they have been able to achieve certain goals. One is that at the local level, they have started forming legal clinics for women. And this has been several organizations that have been following since 1995. And these are legal clinics that offer women training and education about their rights under the Constitution. And although these rights exist and the laws are there, the problem that most women in the developing South face is because of the work they do, their labor, and often their social vulnerabilities sort of constrain them from accessing the courts and the, or to go to the police with complaints, because even if they can make it to the court or to the police, they are often not taken seriously, and this is, I'm talking mostly about poor working women. So these human rights organizations have started opening up clinics and offering legal aid to the women. So they will then say, okay, there are all these laws, and even in a country like Bangladesh, the laws are very good, right? And this is true for many countries across the world. The laws are there. It's the implementation that's the problem, right? And so they have started taking these women with them to go to the courts, to the police station, and say, you cannot say, forget it, that your husband beat you up, just go back home and make it up. The law is here, and you're going to file a case. Now, one of the things that really struck me working in Bangladesh was that over a period of 10 years, I was tracking all these cases that had been filed by women with the help of these legal clinics about rape, right? So a lot of women, mostly poor women, rural women, were coming out of their homes with the help of these human rights organizations and filing rape charges against especially landed men in their villages, right? These are often disputes over land. But young girls, their daughters were being raped. A 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl was being raped. The mother was being raped when she was trying to get an elected position in the local village-level council. And what is interesting, though, is that the women in the villages, the rural women, in a way have become much more radicalized in terms of speaking about violence against them, rape, domestic violence, much more than the middle-class women, right? And this shift in discourse, where rape is no longer considered as stigma. It is still considered as stigma, but there's a shift, right? Because women in rural areas now think of it as a crime. I think that's a very important radical shift. That is not happening with the middle-class women. Yet the middle-class women are the ones who are going and giving them the legal aid. So sometimes I feel that the middle-class women need to start talking about domestic violence, marital rape, sex abuse, abuse of children within their homes. That is not happening yet. So that's one thing. At the national level, these human rights organizations have introduced many laws that are in tandem with these with CEDAW, for example, right? The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Cairo Population Conference, etc. So there are new laws that have been introduced recently, and family clinics have been opened up in urban areas and rural areas too, so that family courts, I'm sorry, so that people can get justice much faster. It's not sitting in, in the judicial process for years. But at the international level is where it gets a little tricky, not only for feminist organizations in Bangladesh, but in most parts of the Muslim world, because feminists have to walk a very precarious line. On the one hand, they're trying to talk about injustices within the family, patriarchal laws that are often introduced by the state, and they're trying to sort of make the state accountable. And some of these feminist organizations also they write their own shadow reports and send it to CEDAW, because if you're a signatory to CEDAW, you have to, every 4 or 5 years, you have to do a country report. So the government does a country report, which is very sanitized, but these feminist organizations also do their own reports, saying actually things are not changing on the ground. This sort of puts them in this situation where a lot of nationalist or masculinist organizations begin to call them traitors within. At a time, they say Muslim societies are very much at risk of, a threat of war from the West. So by trying to sort of talk about these things in a public forum, you are undermining the state and, Muslim men. And this is true, though, and this is where I think feminists have to be very careful about, in these societies, about how they're talking about human rights. And because it is very closely linked to how this can be turned around, because it is, when you are taking, you're circumventing the state and saying the state is no longer important. I'm going to go to an international court of justice, or I'm going to go to the United Nations or other transnational organizations. You are weakening the state, which is already weak to begin with, right? So I think that's a very fine line that they have to walk and have to be very careful about. And one thing I will say, there are so many things I could say about microcredit, but one thing about microfinance, the model that I have studied, is that 95% of women belonging to the Grameen Bank and all these other NGOs, and Bangladesh is like the NGO capital of the world, 95% of the clientele are women. 95% of these women that give the loans to their husbands. Yes, the women come. There are very good reasons as to why these banks and organizations have targeted women. The money, the loans, are used by the men. Now, this is about the study I did. I'm not talking about your organization. But there's a rhetoric that's produced by all these organizations and the World Bank, and even, you can hear all these wealthy individuals now who are investing in microfinance, such as the owner of eBay and Kiva.org, etc.